The next, once again, I'm going through these a little bit faster. The next milestone as we're entering into Alam al-Barzakh. So here we are in Alam al-Barzakh, but the outcome of Alam al-Barzakh is not clear. The purpose of Alam al-Barzakh has not happened yet. Okay, so that's why I'm using these as though it's a preparation to enter Alam al-Barzakh. So this is the questioning of the main beliefs. So in certain narrations, we have that there are angels who come to you and question you about your main beliefs. These are the high-level beliefs. But as we explained last time, the process of death is very difficult. It's like a shock to the system. And it's meant to be that way to basically at an existential level, see what from your faith remains with you and what goes away. What was there in a solid, firm manner to the extent where it has become a part of you. It's an integral part of you. This is who you are. This belief has become who you are. This is your identity, right? When you pray 5 times a day, every single day, day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out, this is going to be who you are. It's completely different from something you've done once, something you've done a few times, right? So these difficulties, in large part, it's to, at an existential level, to see what stays and what goes, what's really there and what's passing, okay? So there is a questioning of our faith, and these are the high-level questions. You have to be able to repeat at a existential level who your Lord is and who your messenger is and what's your book and what's your qibla, right? Who your imams are. This is very, very clearly mentioned, explicitly listed, mentioned in multiple narrations. The details of it, there's a back and forth between the narrations on which ones we take, and there's a bit of contradiction between some of them, but generally speaking, there are angels. They are scary looking and they are meant to be that way, Munkar and Nakir, and they come and they question you. And depending on the answers you give, and depending on the ability to answer or not, you have just sealed your fate for Alam al-Barzakh. Once you give your answers to these angels of death, basically, right after death, the angels that are meant to question you, then you are sealing your fate. You are dictating for yourself how the rest of Alam al-Barzakh is going to look like for you. Okay, and this is when you officially enter your Barzakh. So I went through these quickly. As I said, these are the milestones that lead up to Alam al-Barzakh. Now that all of this happens, now you enter into Alam al-Barzakh. You are now in al-Barzakh. So what happens? Very quickly, what happens is that we are told, and here again, it's a very personal experience for different groups of people. There are people, and I'm not going to go into numbers, it's difficult to tell. There are people clearly who they remain in their graves, but there are openings that are created for them in their graves, just like windows or gates or doors or portals, depending on the narrations you look at, through which they can see their place in heaven or hell. It's almost like it's a pre-taste of things to come in the afterlife. Okay, so they are not in heaven or hell, but they can see heaven and hell, and they live in that comfort, or they live in that discomfort, depending on the type of opening that they got and where it is looking out to. Okay, so that's one type of people. Other types of people are actually brought into a heaven or a hell. And so obviously their actions in quality and intensity and degree are a lot more. So they actually are made to enter into a heaven or a hell. There are people, we are told in the narrations, that those people, they are ignored. They are completely ignored, and they go into a type of sleep. And they are awakened only in the afterlife. This would require a lecture or lectures to fully understand, but it looks like it depends on to what extent knowledge had reached you, and you understood what you were supposed to believe in or not. And that's why we have some narrations that say, when people are raised back from the dead on Resurrection Day, one of the stations is for people to whom the knowledge was not given fully. So they were never really given the full chance to become what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to become in this life. The message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to give them did not reach them fully. Maybe they lived far away. Maybe a prophet was not sent to their area. Maybe the message was too distorted by the time it reached them. Maybe and maybe and maybe. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will manage all of that. But as soon as people are raised back from the dead, there are people who are brought there to be questioned. And depending on that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decide what to do with them. Okay, and so that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will decide all of that. And most likely it is all those people who will be ignored, who will be put, they did not do enough good or bad in a justified manner that makes them be allowed to or entitled to a reward or a punishment in Alam al-Barzakh. So they are ignored. Okay, so these are the different categories of people and what's happening in Alam al-Barzakh. Why is this all happening? The first reason, and the details of this, we're going to park them for later. We're going to come back to what this really means. But for now, very quickly, what's happening in Alam al-Barzakh is just a manifestation of what we put into this world. We said that at the moment of death, we start seeing things a lot more as they truly are than we were seeing them in this world. So the actions that you performed, the deeds that you performed, the intentions and thoughts that you carried in your life, they start taking their real shape starting from Alam al-Barzakh. So the reward and the punishment that you are seeing, that you are tasting in some narrations or certain verses of the Quran, the taste, so you're not getting it in full, you're getting a taste of it. Nudiq, it's always nudiq in the Quran. When you look at these acts that you performed, you see that they manifest themselves. They become realities. They take their true form in Alam al-Barzakh, and their true form only appears in the afterlife. But in Alam al-Barzakh, you start seeing them a lot more as they truly are. So one way to say it is to say you are getting a reward or a punishment for your actions, for your deeds, for your thoughts and intentions. Another way to see it and to say it is basically your actions are starting to come back to you. Whatever you put in while you lived is now coming back to you, and you're going to go through it again, but now you're going to go through it as in its true format. That's what's happening in al-Barzakh. Okay, so that's one. Two, it is only natural, normal, that you are starting, now that you are moving towards the afterlife, now you're going to start to get an idea of where you're headed. And that's why we said you're being shown your place in heaven or your place in hell. Okay, that's two, a second purpose for all of this to happen. The third one, and specifically for, in a lot of cases, we have specific narrations for this, for the believers, it's so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give them one last opportunity to be as pure as possible before reaching the afterlife. So there might be difficulties at the moment of death, at the moment of the dhaghtat al-qabr and the crushing of the grave, difficulties in the questioning of the angels, difficulties in Alam al-Barzakh, all of that depending on how many sins and how many mistakes you're coming with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using all of that, as the Imams say, to purify you as much as possible so that your difficulties are not in the afterlife. They're not in the Alam al-Akhirah. They are happening before you reach Alam al-Akhirah, because it does not compare. Even as difficult as Alam al-Barzakh can be, Alam al-Akhirah is a lot more serious. And inshallah, we're going to go through the verses that will explain all of that. Okay, so this becomes your last chance to be as pure and as clean and as good and as perfect as possible before you enter Alam al-Akhirah, okay, the afterlife. A few more thoughts on this. So the first one is, even for someone who is good or someone who is bad, but let's concentrate on the good, inshallah, we're all with them. It may not be always consistent. So once you are in Alam al-Barzakh, there might be ups and downs here. I wrote it. there might be times when you receive a lot more good and times when you receive a lot less good, or even some difficulties and hardships. This, in part, is entirely related to what you have put in. If there were times in your life where you did a lot more good than others, it might be reflected in Alam al-Barzakh, for instance. You had a 5-year gap, you had a 10-year gap, you did a lot more in certain areas in your life than others. In certain areas, you did less. It might all be reflected. There might be times when there is a lot of good, and there are times when there might be some hardship. So it's not a guaranteed one thing, one size fits all for your entire duration in Alam al-Barzakh. That's one more detail. The next one is that there is also the possibility that, and again, this brings us back to the notion that there is a link between the soul and this world. It's not an absolute and complete detachment. It's just we don't seem to understand how that link works. Okay, but there's a link. Some of the things that could definitely help is that you can send gifts to the deceased and they will receive them and it will have a huge impact. So it depends on what they did during their lives, and it depends on who you are as you gift them and the quality of the work that you're doing. But when you gift something, especially the things they really need, for instance, when you remember them in a prayer, when you recite Surah Al-Fatiha or a Quran for them, or you perform a pilgrimage or a Umrah for them, and you send it to their soul, they receive those. And these matters make a huge impact for them. And they know who sent it, and they know all of those details. Okay, so never neglect that part. And again, this re-emphasizes always that the link is there. It's just we don't see it and we don't understand it. The next one is that there are things those people could have done during their lives that have a huge impact and an ongoing goodness for them as they remain in Alam al-Barzakh. So we have the very famous narration, the tradition that says that once a human being leaves this world, everything is cut off. He is entirely cut off from all of his actions except 3. And so the 3 things very clearly, and this is the famous narration, and there are many others. So one of them is that they had a charity or some sort of charitable act that they continued to do and that remains after they leave. Or they have a righteous and good son or daughter who prays for them, who remembers them, and who continuously prays for them after they're dead. And they left knowledge for people to benefit from. So in other words, you have left something good in this life. And that's why we have in other narrations, for instance, those who build or participate in the building of mosques. Those who participate in some narrations, we have even a narration that says those who have helped dig rivers. There are areas where there is absolutely no water and people have dug a river to allow the water to reach there. So depending on the type of goodness and service that you have provided to humanity, those acts where people continue to benefit from what you left in the world, even though you can no longer act while you're here, it's as though you invested and that investment keeps bringing you returns. Even though you've left from this world and you can no longer do anything yourself, you've put in things such as your knowledge, such as your money, such as your children, you've helped guided people, you did things that are useful to humanity, so on and so forth. All of these things are going to be a continuous source of provision, a continuous source of goodness, alleviation of difficulties, or just bliss and comfort and happiness for you in Alam al-Barzakh. Okay? And is there awareness or not? As we said, there is awareness to a certain extent. So depending on how good you are or how bad you are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow you to be aware of what's happening in this life, in this world. We have narrations, for instance, that say those who are good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them aware of what's happening in the lives of their families, but only those things that are pleasant to them. So let's say it would harm them and they would be unhappy to know, in Alam al-Barzakh, they would be unhappy to know that so and so in the family got really sick. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not let them know that. He would only let them know those things that are pleasant to them. We have narration. Whereas the opposite for those who are not good. Those who did bad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses that as a type of torment. And that's why we said not everything is just material and physical. The psychological and the spiritual happiness or torment can be a lot more intense and be used in that way in Alam al-Barzakh and the afterlife. In any case, so inshallah, all of this is providing a good general overview.